Husband announced he was leaving me at our daughter's graduation, but started screaming when The truth is, I didn't react the way people expected. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even ask why. I just smiled, gently pushed the knife back toward him across the velvet-draped table, and told him, "Thank you for your honesty." Ethan, that moment, which should have shattered me, ended up becoming the first real breath I'd taken in years. My name is Amber Heard. I'm 46 years old, a strategic consultant for community-based education funds in Santa Barbara, California. I've spent most of my career helping underfunded schools secure the resources they need to survive in a system that often forgets them. I built my life quietly, intentionally, and with purpose. I married Ethan Rhodes when I was 23 at the time. He was a young architect with big dreams and bigger charm. Over the years, his charm hardened into control, and his dreams expanded into luxury condos, high-rise towers, and waterfront developments with little regard for the people they displaced. I stayed in the background, as wives often do. I hosted fundraisers. I smiled through galas. I smoothed over his rough moments in public and absorbed the ones in private when our daughter Sophie was born. I shifted all my focus to her. She was the anchor that made it all worth enduring. Ethan and I were not in love anymore, but we were still a family, or so I thought. The graduation was held on a perfect spring afternoon at the university's private garden courtyard. There were white linen tables, live jazz, and a catered lunch under a canopy of sycamores. Sophie had graduated magna cum laude with a degree in environmental science, and I had never been prouder. I remember adjusting the silver pin on her gown as she smiled at me, glowing with that mixture of pride and nervous energy that only comes once in a young woman's life. Ethan arrived late, as usual, but with a champagne flute in hand and a tailored navy suit that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. I noticed a young blonde woman trailing behind him, someone unfamiliar, but I didn't ask. Maybe an intern, maybe not. He made rounds, shaking hands and laughing too loudly, before finally clinking his glass to get the attention of our table. I should have sensed it, the sudden hush, the way he didn't look at Sophie or me when he raised his glass, the way the young woman sat 3 tables away and avoided eye contact. Then came the words, "Amber, Sophie, and all of you who mean so much to me." I want to say this today because I believe in beginnings. I've decided to start a new life, without Amber, at first. I thought I misheard him. So did everyone else. You could almost hear the sound of jaws tightening, then the ripple of confused glances. Sophie dropped her fork. I saw the color drain from her face. People froze mid-bite, napkins still in hand. The jazz trio stopped playing. I looked up at him. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't need to. He was already smiling, the kind of rehearsed smile that hides cowardice behind performance. It was not a confession. It was a declaration, a spectacle, the kind that men like Ethan believe will make them look bold rather than cruel. I exhaled slowly. Then I reached into my handbag, pulled out a sealed manila envelope, and slid it toward him on the white tablecloth. "You'll want to read that later," I said, my voice steady. "But thank you for your timing." Sophie whispered Mom like a plea, like a question. But I just kissed her temple and said, "This is still your day, sweetheart. Don't let him steal it." Then I stood up, nodded to the friends and colleagues frozen in place, and walked away from the garden as the air buzzed with the kind of silent tension that lingers after a car crash. I could feel every eye on my back, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that I'd been ready. Ethan thought this was checkmate. What he didn't know was that I had spent the last 3 months preparing my next move. I had watched him lie, siphon money, and twist narratives, and I had remained quiet until I wasn't, because when someone writes you off mid-sentence, the only thing left to do is start your own story, one they'll never see coming. I drove away from the university with the windows down, letting the breeze carry away what was left of my composure. The envelope I gave Ethan had been waiting in my bag for 3 weeks, sealed and labeled private. But it was more than just a document. It was the result of a slow awakening, one I didn't fully realize I needed until I saw the withdrawal notices. At first, it was a few thousand here and there, small enough to seem like donations or standard transfers. Ethan and I had a joint account for over 20 years. We both had our private accounts too, but this one was meant for our shared commitments: Sophie's tuition, mortgage expenses, travel, and long-term care for his mother if needed. I handled the finances, not because he asked, but because he never liked details. I used to see that as trust. Now I know it was negligence dressed in confidence. About 2 months before the graduation, I got a call from our bank's fraud protection team. They flagged a pattern of new investments linked to Ethan's name, but originating from our shared funds. The numbers didn't sit right. I logged into our accounts that night while he was on a supposed business trip in Napa. Instead of confronting him, I downloaded every statement from the past 12 months, categorized every transfer, and started making calls to verify transactions. Ethan never noticed the extra printouts in my drawer. He never noticed how I stayed up later than usual. He never noticed I had stopped asking where he was. The emotional distance between us had become so ordinary that even silence didn't seem suspicious anymore. And in that silence, I began piecing together a version of Ethan I hadn't wanted to see. The one who booked 2 flights to Belize using points he never told me about. The one who wired money to a brokerage account under his company name. Only the company didn't own it. Chloe did. I remembered Chloe from a holiday event the year before. She was polite, too enthusiastic, the kind who brought up books she hadn't read and smiled just a second too long. Ethan introduced her as one of his rising project managers at the time. I thought nothing of it. I had been conditioned for years to dismiss my instincts, to believe that doubting him meant failing the marriage. But now I saw clearly. He was preparing for an exit long before I knew there was even a door. That realization didn't crush me. It clarified me. I began to document everything. I met with Marianne, a lawyer and one of the few people I still trusted. We went to college together, and she had seen my early struggles. Long before Ethan, she didn't flinch when I told her what I planned to do. She just asked for the dates, the figures, and the clauses in our prenup. Ethan had insisted on the prenup when we got married. At the time, I was earning more than him, fresh off a big win with a statewide education grant. While he was still trying to land his first full architectural contract, I agreed to it without hesitation. I believed in building something from trust. Ironically, he added a fidelity clause, mostly to impress his father, who saw every woman as a financial risk. That clause never mattered to me until now. Marianne reviewed it again and confirmed it was still enforceable, provided we had documentation. And we did. Screenshots, voice notes, email printouts, even building plans with Chloe's initials in the signature block. What he thought was invisible was only hidden to someone not looking. And I was looking. By the time I reached home, I had already missed 4 calls, 2 from Sophie, 1 from a blocked number, and 1 from the restaurant manager asking if I wanted the event photos sent. I didn't reply. Not yet. I knew Sophie would be confused, maybe hurt. I had protected her from the cracks in our marriage because I wanted her to believe in good men. I still do. But I also want her to believe in herself when one of them falls short. I parked in the garage and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before killing the engine. In that quiet, I didn't feel broken. I felt awake. There is a kind of calm that comes not from forgiveness, but from understanding exactly where you stand and what you're walking away from. Ethan thought this was his stage. He thought he had control of the spotlight. What he didn't know was that the curtain had already dropped, and I had already written the next act. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not out of anxiety, but from clarity. My body had adjusted to a new kind of silence, one not born from tension, but from intention. I brewed coffee slowly, savoring the stillness in a house that, for years, had masked its unrest behind curated furniture and cold granite counters. The dining room still had Sophie's graduation sash on the back of a chair, the one she had tossed there just hours before Ethan's announcement tore through everything we had worked to preserve. I didn't touch it. I needed the reminder that some things were still real. After breakfast, I opened the locked drawer in my home office and pulled out the file I had built over the past 6 weeks. I named it Phase 1, partly to keep it organized, partly because naming things gave me power over them. Inside were statements, email chains, shadow accounts, and building permits. One in particular caught my eye, a condo plan in Marina Point, registered to a shell corporation Chloe was listed as managing partner of. Ethan had even used the same language he once used with me when we bought our first home together. Words like legacy, equity, long-term. It was all recycled charm. I printed the file and placed it inside a fresh envelope. Then I called Jonas. He picked up on the second ring, his voice as dry and calm as I remembered. We hadn't spoken in years, but the bond was still there. In college, we worked together on community housing projects. He went into tech, I went into advocacy, but we stayed loosely connected. I need a secure system, I told him, private, off cloud, with layered permissions. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Send me the specs. I'll get you something by Friday." That was the thing about people who knew your past. They could spot the weight in your voice even when you tried to carry it casually, while Jonas worked on the back end. I reached out to Marianne again. We met that afternoon at a cafe near the courthouse. She came in with her usual beige blazer and a calm that made you feel safer just sitting beside her. I slid the updated file across the table, and she took her time reviewing each page. She didn't speak until she got to the final document, a screenshot of a message Ethan sent to Chloe just 3 days earlier. "Once I announce it at the graduation, we'll be free. She'll fold. She always folds." Marianne looked up. "He really doesn't know you anymore." "Does he?" I shook my head. "He never did." She asked if I wanted to file immediately. I said not yet. I wanted the court to receive it the morning after the ceremony, just as he planned to start over. Timing was everything. She understood. We signed the prep documents and agreed on filing at 9 a.m. Monday. That gave me 2 days, enough to finalize the back-end platform with Jonas and prepare the real surprise. Because this wasn't just about a marriage ending. It was about reclaiming the space I had slowly given away, piece by piece, in the name of partnership. And I didn't want just a clean exit. I wanted a clean beginning. That night, I received a message from Sophie. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I replied, "Always. Let me know when." 15 minutes later, she called. Her voice cracked at first, then settled into that low register she inherited from Ethan. "I don't understand what's happening. she said. Why would he do this now? I told her the truth. In pieces. Measured not to protect him, but to preserve her. I didn't mention Chloe by name. I didn't list the transfers. I didn't play the voice note. I just told her that he had been planning this for months and that I had known for a while. There was silence on the line. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you say anything?" I told her what I had told myself too many times before, because you deserved your final year to be about your achievements, not our failures. She didn't speak again, but I could hear her breathing. That was enough. We agreed to meet for lunch the next day. When I hung up, I felt something release in my chest, not closure, not yet, but relief. The next day, I returned home from our lunch with a clear sense of what had to be done. Sophie had questions, and some of them hurt to answer, but we had bridged the gap between what she believed and what I had carried alone. Afterward, I went upstairs and opened Ethan's walk-in closet. Inside, I found a suitcase tucked behind the winter coats. It was already half-packed. Dress shirts, a passport, one of the watches I gave him years ago. On top of it all, a folder marked Client Assets. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. He was ready to go. But what he didn't know was that by the time he walked out, everything he planned to take had already been accounted for, and most of it wasn't his to begin with. I was in the kitchen reviewing my timeline notes when I heard the sound of tires crunching over the gravel driveway. I didn't have to look through the window to know it was Ethan. The car door slammed a second later, sharp and purposeful, as if volume could compensate for what he lacked in foresight. He rang the bell twice, then knocked once, the way he always had when he forgot his keys. I opened the door without a word. He stepped in with the air of a man used to owning the room, but something in his face betrayed him. There was a thin line of panic beneath his tan, and his voice cracked slightly when he said, "We need to talk." I stepped aside and motioned toward the living room. "I figured you'd come eventually." He walked past me, carrying the envelope I had given him at the graduation party. It was crumpled now, the edges folded and torn from where his hands must have squeezed it. He dropped it on the coffee table like it was toxic. "What is this?" he asked. "You had me served?" I nodded once, quietly, respectfully, not in front of our daughter. His laugh was bitter, forced. "This is ridiculous. You blindsided me." I kept my voice calm. "You blindsided me the day you started moving our assets without discussion. You just didn't think I would notice." He sat down but didn't relax. His knee bounced. His hands twitched. "You've always been calculated, Amber. But this is cold, even for you." I leaned back in the chair opposite him and crossed my legs. "And you've always been careless." "Ethan, but you forgot something important. I know where every dollar goes. I always have." He opened his mouth to object, but I held up a hand. "Before you try to deny it, let me remind you that I've managed nonprofit audits more complex than your scheme with Chloe," at the mention of her name. His eyes narrowed. "This isn't about Chloe," he said. "This is about us." I allowed myself a quiet breath before responding. "There hasn't been an us in a long time. You just finally said it out loud." He stood, pacing now. "You've frozen my access to the business card. Do you realize what that means?" I did. I knew exactly what it meant. It meant he couldn't fund the soft launch of his new real estate venture, the one registered to a shell firm in Nevada under Chloe's name. It meant the $25,000 retainer for their marketing team would bounce. It meant the lease he signed on that apartment with the wraparound balcony would not go through, because his income verification was tied to statements he no longer controlled. I didn't say any of that. I just looked at him and said, "You'll manage. You always do." He stopped pacing, turned sharply, and pointed at me. "You're trying to ruin me." I didn't flinch. "No, I'm refusing to be erased. That's different. His face flushed, a deep red creeping up his neck. What about Sophie? You think this won't affect her? That landed like a slap, but I didn't let it show. You didn't think of Sophie when you chose to detonate our family during her graduation celebration. He turned away, rubbing his forehead. You've always been dramatic. I stood then, slowly. No, Ethan, I've always been restrained. Until now. There was a long silence. He sat again, suddenly exhausted, like the weight of reality had finally settled. You want everything, he muttered. You want to leave me with nothing. I crossed my arms. I want what I built, what I protected, what you tried to steal. He looked up. The prenup expired. Everyone knows those don't hold up after this many years. I almost felt sorry for him then. It doesn't expire. I said evenly. Section 9, Clause 4, Fidelity Provision, Duration of Marriage plus Dissolution. Marianne confirmed it. You should have read the whole thing. He cursed under his breath and leaned back. Defeated. What happens now, he asked. I walked to the hallway, pulled a second envelope from the drawer, and placed it next to him. What happens now is up to you. These are your options. File a response, hire a lawyer, prepare for discovery, or sign this and let us end it quietly. He didn't touch the envelope. He stared at it like it was radioactive. I watched his hands. They had always been steady. Now they trembled as I turned to leave the room. I said the last thing he expected, and Ethan, whatever happens, remember this. You had the freedom to leave with your dignity. You chose the performance. I walked upstairs, not because I needed distance, but because I needed to finish what I had started. The next stage wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about Sophie, my work, and the future he never saw coming. And somewhere inside, I knew this was just the beginning of the end he had accidentally written for himself. 2 days after Ethan stormed into the house and left with his options unopened, I filed the documents officially. Marianne walked them into the courthouse herself and confirmed the timestamp via text, followed by 3 simple words: clock has started. That evening, I sat in my office staring at the soft blue glow of the new interface Jonas had built. It was clean, encrypted, and tailored exactly to what I asked for: a discrete client management system under a private LLC I had quietly registered under my mother's maiden name. I had spent the last 10 years raising money for schools, training women in nonprofit finance, helping organizations pitch for grants they didn't think they deserved. What I had never done, until now, was use that expertise to build something for myself. The new platform was a private advisory service focused on transitional finance for women in high-impact life changes: divorce, death, career betrayal, asset separation. I called it Allura Strategy. It didn't need to be flashy. It just needed to work, and it would. Later that week, Sophie came over with Thai food and a nervous look in her eyes. She had spent the last few nights at a friend's place to avoid the tension, but said she couldn't stay away anymore. We sat on the floor, sharing rice and silence, until she asked the question she had been holding. Did you always know? I shook my head. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know it was Chloe until I saw the apartment lease. She nodded slowly. He didn't even tell me. He just showed up yesterday and said he needed my help clearing out a storage unit. When I asked why, he said it was for a fresh start. I could hear the edge in her voice, the disappointment carefully folded beneath sarcasm. I didn't try to fix it. You don't have to protect him. She added, I know you're still being careful around me. I exhaled. I'm not protecting him. Sophie, I'm protecting you from hating him. You only get one father. She looked down at her plate. He's making it really easy. The next day, I received a call from Jonas. He had reviewed the backup data we imported from the email dumps I had collected over the past few weeks. One folder in particular caught his eye. It was named Legacy Partnership, but inside were early drafts of an asset separation agreement Ethan had been working on without lawyers. It included projected real estate values, offshore accounts, and a paragraph about removing liabilities before launch. The liability was me. Chloe had even commented on the document in tracked changes. If she signs. We're golden. If not. We adjust phase 2. The word we made my jaw tighten. They had spoken about me like a problem to be solved, like I was a roadblock to be maneuvered around. But what they didn't realize was that I had already passed them. They were planning phase 2. I was preparing the final move. Later that evening, Maggie, my neighbor and longtime friend, knocked on the door with a bottle of wine and a question in her eyes. Mind if I ask what's going on? I invited her in and told her everything. Not for gossip, but because I needed at least one person outside the legal circle to see it all without the veil. She listened quietly, then poured us both a glass. I always wondered how you stayed so composed all these years, she said. Now I see it wasn't composure. It was calculation. I corrected her gently. It was survival. The calculation came later. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Chloe's voice came through, clipped and uneasy. I think we need to talk. I said nothing at first. Then I asked, why now? She hesitated. Because he's not who he says he is, not even to me. She asked to meet in public, neutral ground. I suggested the outdoor cafe near the waterfront. When I arrived the next morning, she was already there, sunglasses on, scanning every passerby like she expected to be followed. She looked younger than I remembered, but also somehow tired. He told me you were unstable. She began. That you didn't handle stress well, that he stayed for Sophie's sake. I nodded. That's his favorite story. Always plays better with an audience. Chloe didn't deny it. She looked down at her coffee. I believed him. But lately, I've seen the way he talks about money, about people. It's like everything is leverage. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted her to sit in that truth. Then I asked, why are you telling me this? Her answer was quiet, because I just found out the apartment isn't actually in my name, and the money he promised me, most of it never existed. I watched her process that aloud, and I realized she wasn't there for my forgiveness. She was there because her plan had collapsed, and I was the only one not pretending. She stood up after 20 minutes, thanked me awkwardly, then left. I didn't stop her. She wasn't the enemy. She was the echo of a choice I once made, long ago, when I mistook confidence for character. And Ethan, somewhere in the middle of all of this, was now losing both. 3 days later, I received an email from our financial institution confirming that Ethan had tried to override the temporary asset freeze. The system flagged it as unauthorized. He had used credentials from an outdated business account, one I had already flagged to Marianne. Attached was a transcript of the attempt, including the timestamp and IP address. He was getting desperate. Meanwhile, the court date for our initial hearing had been set. 10 days, enough time to prepare, but not enough for Ethan to recover. Chloe had gone quiet after our cafe meeting. I assumed the conversation we had left her with more questions than answers. I didn't expect her to warn him, and I was right. By the end of that week, Sophie told me she'd received a frantic message from Ethan asking to meet. She said no. Then she sent me a screenshot. His words were frantic and circular. She's trying to destroy me. I need your support. I did this for us. Sophie only replied one sentence. You did this for yourself. I didn't comment. But the pride I felt in her silence carried me through the rest of the day. That afternoon, I met with Jonas for coffee on the second floor of a quiet bookshop where we used to study during undergrad. He had printed out a secure backup copy of the Allura strategy dashboard. Underneath his calm demeanor was a look I hadn't seen in years. Respect. This isn't just a side project, he said. You've built something real. I nodded. I'm tired of being the woman who helps everyone else win while standing on the edge. We finalized the onboarding structure for the first 3 clients. 2 were women referred through a friend of Marianne's, both going through divorces, both unaware of the financial leverage they were entitled to. The third was a single mother whose nonprofit had been gutted by a new board with no knowledge of grant structure. I took their stories in one by one. None of them needed rescuing. They just needed clarity. And I could offer that, without apology. That evening, I walked into the kitchen and saw the light on the answering machine blinking. I hadn't checked the landline messages in a while. Almost no one used it anymore. But I pressed play anyway. Ethan's voice came through, thinner than I'd ever heard it. Amber, I don't know what you're doing. I'm drowning here. I can't access anything. Chloe's gone. Her number's disconnected. And now I'm getting calls from the city inspector about that condo deal. I need a conversation, a chance to explain. I stopped the machine before it finished, not out of cruelty, out of finality. There was nothing left to explain. Every detail had already explained itself. That weekend, Maggie invited me to a small dinner party, just 5 women she trusted. She introduced me as her quietly brilliant friend and poured me a glass of red wine before sitting beside me on the porch. One of the women asked what I did. For the first time in years, I didn't hesitate. I said, I help women see what was always theirs and how not to lose it again. The words didn't feel inflated. They felt earned. After dinner, I sat alone for a while, watching the fog roll in from the coast. Santa Barbara looked softer at night, quieter. But I didn't feel small in that quiet. I felt anchored. On Monday, my phone buzzed with a call from Marianne. She sounded amused. You're going to want to hear this, she said. Apparently, Ethan had tried to retain a high-profile divorce attorney who declined after reviewing the preliminary filings. Word had already spread through a few legal circles about the nature of our case, more importantly, about the strength of the prenup and the layers of documentation supporting my position. He's panicking, she added. He just hired a corporate litigator with no family law experience. I thanked her, closed my eyes, and let the information settle. That night, I received an email from a woman named Lisa. She had seen a soft post I'd put up through a referral group under the Allura name. Her subject line read, Not sure if I qualify, but I'm ready. Her message was simple. A small business owner, 22 years in a marriage, suspected hidden debt, no clarity on where to begin. I wrote back immediately, You do qualify, and you're not alone. Let's schedule something. As I hit send, I realized something I hadn't yet said out loud. I was no longer just responding to a betrayal. I was building the life that should have started years ago, before I became someone else's footnote. Ethan thought I would fall apart, but falling apart wasn't the risk. The risk was that I would rebuild something better than what he ever offered, and that's exactly what I was doing. The preliminary hearing took place on a Thursday morning, cloaked in the kind of cold coastal fog that makes everything feel heavier. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in navy with my hair tied back, carrying nothing more than a slim folder and a quiet conviction. Marianne met me at the steps, already scrolling through notes, calm as always. Ethan pulled up 15 minutes late, climbing out of the passenger seat of a car he clearly hadn't driven. He looked disheveled, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and carrying a leather briefcase I recognized from a fundraiser 6 years ago. The man who once commanded rooms with ease now looked like he had forgotten how to stand still. The attorney walking beside him was young, barely past 30, and clearly uncomfortable. He held his tablet like a shield, scanning everything as if hoping someone would intervene and call it all off. But no one did. Inside the courtroom, the mood was clinical. The judge was an older woman with sharp glasses and no tolerance for dramatics. She reviewed the prenup without delay, flipping through each page with precision. Marianne remained silent, except to confirm names, dates, and the fidelity clause. Ethan's lawyer tried to argue that the document was outdated. The judge stopped him with a raised brow and read aloud the clause about infidelity and asset protection. This agreement is enforceable unless proven otherwise, she said, and your client's behavior appears to support its continued validity. Ethan shifted in his seat. His foot tapped against the floor uncontrollably. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. Every twitch, every sigh, every tightening muscle told me the story better than words ever could. Marianne presented the asset map, the wire transfers, and a series of emails between Ethan and Chloe discussing the redirection of funds. The judge asked Ethan's lawyer if they planned to dispute the evidence. He whispered with Ethan, then shook his head. Not at this time, Your Honor. She nodded once and returned to her notes. In that case, I am ordering a continuation of the asset freeze until discovery is complete. Furthermore, the primary residence shall remain with Mrs. Rhodes until final judgment. Ethan exhaled audibly. The sound echoed in the small courtroom. I remained motionless. After the hearing, he caught up to me in the hallway. This isn't what I expected, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You were always the one who kept the peace. I turned to face him fully for the first time in weeks. Keeping the peace doesn't mean surrendering the truth. You confuse silence with permission. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he never really had. I thought we were going to handle this like adults, he added. I nodded. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I've laid out my position. I've given you every opportunity to act with dignity. You chose not to. He looked away then, blinking rapidly. What about Sophie? He asked. Doesn't she deserve better than this public mess? My voice didn't waver. Sophie deserves parents who don't lie to her face while hiding bank statements behind her back. She deserves clarity, not illusions. And frankly, so did I. He tried again to appeal to my history with him. 24 years of marriage. He said, all of it can't have meant nothing to you. I let out a breath. It meant everything. That's why the betrayal meant more than just a broken promise. It rewrote the whole story. He stood frozen as I walked away, not out of defiance, but out of finality. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't power. It was the simple refusal to let someone rewrite the truth one more time. Outside the courthouse, Marianne placed a hand on my shoulder. You were perfect in there, she said, calm, clear, undeniable. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at the horizon, the fog lifting slightly, revealing outlines of the city beyond. He's going to keep trying, I said. That was round one, she nodded. And you've already won more than he knows. As we stepped onto the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. It was Jonas. Check the platform. His message read, you just got 3 new intake requests. I smiled, quietly. No one clapped. No headlines were written. But something inside me clicked into place. That evening, as I poured a glass of water in my kitchen and watched the lights flicker on across the neighboring rooftops. I realized this version of me, the woman who didn't just survive betrayal but turned it into infrastructure, was the most honest one I had ever met, and the most dangerous to underestimate. 2 weeks after the hearing, I moved into a small temporary office space off State Street, above an independent bookstore that smelled like cedar and thyme. The rent was modest, the room small, but it was mine. A second-hand desk, 2 chairs, and a laptop with encrypted access to the Allura platform were all I needed to begin. By the end of the week, I had signed 4 clients. Each woman came in differently, some guarded, some broken, some so angry they could barely sit still. But all of them carried one thing in common. They had been made to feel like their instincts were irrational, their sacrifices invisible, and their questions inconvenient. I didn't need to fix them. I just needed to help them see where they were standing and what they still held in their own hands. And in that, I began to recover too, not in some sudden triumphant surge, but gradually, like breath returning to lungs after being held for far too long. Sophie came by the new office one Saturday afternoon with coffee and a stack of her own resumes. She had been interviewing with several environmental consultancies across California, but hadn't made a final decision yet. "I want to stay close," she admitted, "at least for now." I looked at her and saw more than my daughter. I saw the resilience I had tried for years to model. "You don't have to stay for me," I said, "but if you're here for you, I'd be lucky to have you nearby." She smiled then, not like a child needing comfort, but like a woman choosing clarity over sentiment. Dad reached out again, she added after a pause. "Sent a voice memo. He says he's sorry, says he made a mistake. I didn't ask for the details. I just asked how she felt about it. I don't know yet," she replied, "but at least now I know I have a choice." That was enough for me. Meanwhile, word about Ethan's unraveling had begun to trickle into the very circles he once dominated. His real estate firm missed several project deadlines, one due to a failed inspection and another because a key investor withdrew without explanation. Chloe, I heard through a friend of a friend, had moved back to Chicago, apparently. She had told someone at a networking event that she had been sold a fantasy and that she should have done her own math. I didn't gloat when I heard that. I just filed it away under the column labeled consequences. As for Ethan, I received notice from the court that he had filed a motion to modify the terms of the temporary asset freeze. Marianne called me the same day, almost laughing. "He tried to argue that your new business makes you financially dominant," she said, but failed to mention that he's behind 6 months of property tax payments on the marina deal. She was already drafting our rebuttal. The morning of our next status hearing, I wore the same navy blazer from the last time. There was something grounding about keeping one thing consistent. Ethan arrived late again, but this time he came alone. His eyes were tired. His hair looked untouched by any stylist. And for the first time, he didn't look angry. He just looked hollow. The judge reviewed the filings quickly. Marianne laid out a simple, steady case, clear asset mismanagement on Ethan's side, clean financial history on mine, and no material changes to warrant modification. The judge agreed. The freeze remained in place. The next hearing would determine final division. After the session, Ethan didn't follow me out, but as I reached the sidewalk, I heard footsteps behind me and then his voice. "You built all this while I wasn't looking." I turned slowly. He was standing just out of the sun, casting his own shadow. "No," I said, "I built it while I was looking the whole time. You just assumed I wouldn't do anything with what I saw." He looked down at his hands, then up again. "If I asked you now not to forgive me, but just to understand me, would that be too much?" I paused for a moment before answering. I do understand. I understand that you thought I'd always stay. I understand that you thought loyalty meant silence. And I understand that you never imagined I could be more than what you needed." He didn't speak again, and I didn't fill the silence. That evening, back at the office, I hosted the first official Allura workshop. It wasn't large, just 9 women in folding chairs and 1 slide deck on a borrowed projector. But when I told them, "You are not reckless for asking questions, and you are not cruel for refusing to be erased," the room shifted. I watched heads nod, eyes shine, pens move. And in that moment, I knew I had already won, not because Ethan had lost, but because I no longer needed his acknowledgement to feel real. I had built something no one could take, and finally, I wasn't the one surviving. I was the one showing others how to begin. The final hearing took place nearly 6 months after Ethan raised his glass and announced the end of our marriage. It was held in a modest courtroom with peeling linoleum floors and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look more tired than they actually were. Marianne and I arrived 15 minutes early. She had 2 folders in hand and a look that said we were more than prepared. Ethan came alone again, this time carrying nothing, wearing a charcoal suit that didn't quite hide the wear in his eyes. There was no trace of the man who once insisted on monogrammed cufflinks and gold pens at meetings. He looked like someone trying not to be noticed. The judge reviewed our final disclosures in silence. Marianne spoke only when prompted, her voice even and concise. Ethan's new counsel, a middle-aged attorney with a finance background but no experience in complex divorces, fumbled through his objections. Most of them were denied before they were even finished. The judge finally leaned forward and placed her reading glasses on the bench. This court has reviewed over 120 pages of financial documentation, communications, contractual obligations, and asset histories, she said. Based on the evidence provided, I am ruling in favor of maintaining the original terms of the prenuptial agreement, including the fidelity clause. There was a pause, not long, but long enough for me to hear Ethan's breath catch. Mrs. Rhodes will retain the primary residence, her personal and retirement accounts, and 70% of the joint assets. Mr. Rhodes will retain the remaining investments and any personal property in his name not acquired through disputed funds. The judge continued reading her ruling, but I only caught pieces of it, words like equitable, breach of good faith, and full enforcement blurred together as I looked straight ahead. I didn't glance at Ethan. I didn't need to. The final ruling was never about revenge. It was about being seen, being believed, being allowed to leave with what I had spent decades building without someone else's fingerprints on it. When the judge adjourned, Ethan didn't move. He sat frozen, eyes forward, jaw clenched. Marianne tapped her folder gently, a subtle cue that it was over. We left the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, more grounded, like the world had tilted slightly and settled into place. Marianne asked if I wanted to celebrate. I told her I would, but not tonight. Tonight, I wanted quiet. I drove home with the windows down, the same way I had the day of Sophie's graduation, but this time, the silence didn't feel like escape. It felt like clarity. The house was mine now, legally, logically, emotionally. I walked through each room slowly, touching things without needing to defend why they mattered. The old bookshelf in the hallway, the ceramic bowl from our first trip to New Mexico, the photo of Sophie in her blue cap and gown, still smiling through the shock of that day. I made tea and sat by the window with the lights off. Sophie called around 8. She had heard from Marianne and just wanted to check in. "It's done," she asked. It's done, I replied. There was a long pause. Then she said, I'm proud of you. I felt it land somewhere deeper than I expected. Thanks, I whispered. I'm proud of me too. That night, I slept through until morning. No dreams, no tension, just rest. In the weeks that followed, Ethan moved out of his temporary apartment after missing multiple rent payments. The marina deal collapsed completely after zoning violations surfaced. His partners pulled their funds. His firm quietly restructured without him. A local news article ran a short piece about internal mismanagement and environmental noncompliance. His name wasn't mentioned directly, but anyone in the industry knew. Meanwhile, Allura's strategy continued to grow. I hired a second associate, then a third. We moved to a larger space on Chapala Street. Nothing extravagant, but warm and efficient. Clients found us through word of mouth, through quiet recommendation, through stories whispered between friends who had once believed they were the only ones struggling. 6 months later, on the day that would have marked our 25th anniversary, I received a letter in the mail, no return address, but the handwriting was Ethan's. It wasn't long, just a few lines. I'm sorry. I lost more than I ever thought possible. You didn't destroy me. I did that on my own. I hope someday Sophie can forgive me, and maybe you too. I understand if not. I didn't respond, not out of anger, not even out of finality, just because there was nothing more that needed to be said. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened, beside a file labeled closed. That evening, after locking up the office, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the water. It wasn't as large as the house, but it was mine in a way that place never fully was. And as I watched the sun dip beneath the Pacific, calm and slow and unapologetic, I realized something simple and irrevocable. I never needed Ethan to fall in order for me to rise. I only needed him to get out of the way. 6 months after the final ruling, I hosted a quiet evening gathering in the new Allura space. Nothing extravagant, just 10 chairs, a circle of women, and a whiteboard that still smelled faintly of fresh ink. We called it Reset Sessions, a monthly event where stories weren't told for pity or applause, but for clarity. Women arrived in all stages, some in the middle of court battles, others just discovering hidden debt, a few simply unsure of what was next. No one wore masks here. No one had to shrink to fit the version of themselves they had once performed. I opened the session with something I never thought I'd hear myself say out loud. I used to think starting over meant starting from scratch, but it doesn't. It means starting with what's real. That line hung in the air for a moment before anyone moved. Then someone whispered, "Yes," and we began. After the session, Sophie dropped by with groceries and stories from her new job. She'd accepted an offer from an environmental consultancy in Ventura, a hybrid position that allowed her to work remotely 3 days a week. She was thriving. She still visited Ethan sometimes, not often, not with the same closeness, but enough to keep a thread intact. I never asked for details. I didn't need to. Healing looks different on everyone. Some cut the cord. Others keep it frayed. What mattered was that she didn't carry his burden anymore, and neither did I. We cooked dinner together that night. Something simple, roasted vegetables, brown rice, ginger tea. She asked if I ever missed the version of life we had before all this. I thought about it and answered truthfully. Sometimes I miss the comfort of not knowing, but never the cost of pretending. Later that week, I walked past the old house for the first time since the court handed it to me. I hadn't sold it yet, but I also hadn't stepped inside. A young couple was touring the property with an agent. She was pregnant. He looked like the kind of man who always opened car doors without thinking about it. I stood across the street under a jacaranda tree and watched for a few minutes. The couple walked slowly, pausing at the front porch, the same one where I had once tied Sophie's shoelaces before school and stood waiting for Ethan to come home from late meetings. They smiled at each other, then disappeared inside. I didn't cry. I didn't feel regret. I just felt done, like a chapter had finally finished without me needing to turn the last page myself. That same night, I updated my bio on the Allura website, just a few words, but they mattered. Amber Heard, founder, financial strategist, advocate for clarity. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because I doubted it, but because I finally believed every word. A year ago, I wouldn't have imagined any of this. A year ago, I was walking into my daughter's graduation thinking I was still somebody's wife, and now I was something else entirely. Not a survivor, not a victim, just a woman who had learned that boundaries were not about keeping people out, but about choosing what was worth letting back in. The next morning, I received a letter in the mail, not from Ethan this time, from a woman named Claire in Oregon. She had heard about Allura through a friend of a friend. The note was handwritten, short, and steady. I don't know if I qualify. I don't even know what I need, but I've been sitting in the same silence for years that you described in your podcast. If you have room, I'd like to talk. I sat with that letter for a long time, then replied the same way I had with the others. You do qualify. You are not alone. Let's begin. Because what I had built wasn't just a business. It was a way back to the version of myself that never stopped paying attention. The one who saw what was happening long before anyone else did and waited, patiently, until the day came to step forward without asking for permission. Some nights, I still remember the restaurant, the clink of silverware, the frozen looks, the moment Ethan smiled and thought he had won something. And then I remember the envelope I slid across the table. Steady as my voice, that wasn't just the start of the divorce, it was the start of the real story. The one where I stopped being defined by someone else's choices and started living by my own terms. So if you're sitting where I once sat quiet, overlooked, doubted, or told you're too much, too soft, too slow to act, I want you to know something. It doesn't take a grand gesture to change your life. Sometimes it only takes one quiet decision that says, no more. And when the time comes to move, you won't need to explain it. You'll just know. What would you do if the person who underestimated you finally realized they were the one who couldn't keep up?